to Bible study. We're going to start with a question this week, as I often do, from you. And this question is from someone in the Torah Tuesday class this week. And come on in. Yeah, just clock. Yeah, come on in, Cindy. Sit anywhere. You're good. And here is, this thing is driving me crazy. Here is her question. How many modern women might have been positively influenced by Mary Magdalene? Mary Magdalene. And how many, she is the daughter of, she's a PK, a preacher's kid. Her dad and her granddad were both preachers from South Dakota. So she said, how many women have decided to become preachers because of Mary? And she said modern, how many modern women? But I would add to that the word, or subtract the word actually, modern, because for years and years, for actually millennia, women have admired Mary Magdalene, and men too. Since, I don't know why it's doing that, since the days of Jesus, Mary Magdalene has served as a role model for discipleship for everyone. Don't you agree? You know her, right? I think she's a good role model. But what do we really know about Mary Magdalene? She's a star. Some people say a superstar. She was the very first one to see the empty tomb. She actually put her head in and saw there was no body there. And she was the very first one to have a real post-resurrection experience with Jesus. Remember when she met him in the garden, she thought he was the gardener, and Jesus said, "Oh, Mary, don't touch me." And there's a lot more to that statement that we'll talk about. But that's some of the things we've been told about her. And she was the first one to tell the other disciples, the other 12 male disciples, about the resurrection. And of course, all 12 males, they didn't believe a word she said. And keep in mind, there were no actual witnesses to the resurrection. People only saw Jesus after he rose from the dead, not while he was rising or getting ready to rise. That experience seemed to have been a private affair. Now, I have two quick questions before we go on. How many of you have seen the Mel Gibson film, The Passion? God bless you.
Is that the one that was way years ago?
Yes.
A long time ago?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, how many of you have read the book or seen the film, The Da Vinci Code?
Oh God, yes. Dan.
Now, if you answered yes to either one of those questions, shake it right out of your head, okay? Just shake that right out. And if I were you, I'd shake out The Chosen too, if you enjoyed that. And just so you know, it's not me. Scholars don't agree with many of the conclusions that are presented in these productions, particularly the Da Vinci Code, especially when it comes to Mary Magdalene.
Aren't they just films? I mean, if you go in it with a religious background, you know that's just somebody's take on things.
Yes, somebody's
It's
opinion.
Tom Hanks.
But not everybody knows that. Well, that's a real deal, or they wouldn't have made it like that, right?
No, yeah, no.
Well, that's like people taking medical advice from TV doctor shows and then.
Or Google.
Yeah.
Be careful what you read on Google.
Yes.
That's why we have doctors, right? Well, just so you know, no one in scholarly land believes that Mary Magdalene was a rehabbed hussy. She wasn't a hoochie girl, an ex-prostitute. And no one believes that she was nuts, that she had been possessed by demons, 7 demons, but then Jesus, even though he exorcised the demons from her, she was still a little crazy after that, a little loopy. And no one believes that she actually suffered from a mental illness that was caused by the demonic possession.
You're saying no one believes. Who
Scholar.
thought
In the
that?
scholarly field,
Yeah.
people who know the Bible, who know the stories, who
So
know.
what you're inferring is that other people believe she was
Yeah, they do.
nuts.
Oh, yeah, they do.
That's
Yeah,
what
they
I always
do.
thought she was a lady of the night or whatever.
Yeah, that's what you thought.
I did.
Yeah,
Of course.
That's kind of what I grew up with.
No doubt about it. Jesus met her in a bar. No, he didn't. Yeah, you know,
But that was part of the story that was like the hope, was that she was this person who was caught
yeah,
in
but who
sin.
told that story?
Well, no, that's
Yeah.
what I grew up with. That was
Right.
true.
Oh,
But-
yes.
But because she met Jesus and she loved Jesus,
Yep.
that her whole life was turned around. That was the story of
Yeah,
redemption.
and you know what else no one believes? No one believes that Jesus married her.
No.
Yes, they do.
No,
And impregnated her.
there's actually, I didn't, I've
And-
never heard that spin.
No one believes that he raised children, their children, with her.
Is that one of the movies or something?
Oh, yes, the Da Vinci Code.
No.
Yeah,
It was a long
Yeah.
time
Oh, yeah,
ago.
that was
I think I read
the
book.
bloodline.
Couldn't believe it.
there's a long list of no one believes this and this and this and this.
No scholars believe it,
Right.
because people believe it.
Yeah, but you wonder why they believe it. Who
Yeah.
told it? You know, it's that's like my favorite question in the whole Bible, in Genesis 1, right? When God looks at Adam and says, "Who the hell told you you were naked? How did you find that out?" You know, like, you gotta come to me. Ask me the truth. I'll tell you. We shouldn't believe. Yes, I love Mel Gibson in certain ways. But now you talk about loopy, right? But very, very interesting. The first time I had been told by colleagues, you know, other pastors and rabbis, Donna, don't watch The Chosen, it'll make you crazy. But everybody, all my congregants were watching the Chosen, and my students. So the first one I watched was the conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus. And that was the episode where we meet Mary Magdalene. She's in a bar, right? And she's kind of an alewife with a little extra added attraction. You think she had a little, and I was like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. You know, I can't believe. Yeah, I mean, poor Mary, right? So what is the truth that we know about Mary? And remember, this is probably she was born in a place called Magdala, which is a fishing village on the north of the Galilee lake or sea. And we know that she had resources. Her family probably had money, so she came from money. But we don't know if she's that perfume lady who was able to buy that big jar of expensive nard, right? We don't know for sure if that was, but there are gospels who tell us it was.
That was Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, Mary Magdalene. But what do you think Mary Magdalene looked like? Like if you pictured her now, do you think she was attractive? Yeah, because she probably had a pretty good business, but not all prostitutes are good looking, right?
But she
But
I
we're,
don't know.
but we're saying she wasn't a prostitute.
Yeah, they don't stay good looking for long. It's a very tough business, right?
But she wasn't a prostitute, right? That's what we're,
No, we don't really know what she looked like.
but now what she looks like, is there any indication she was a loose woman, a prostitute?
Yes, we do have some respected writers who have, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But if you Google Mary Magdalene, iconography, you'll see that almost all the paintings and the sculptures of her will always show her weeping. She's always so sad. You know, she's doing her penance for being a bad girl, and she's so sad because Jesus didn't let her touch him. You know, he ascended without her. But I think Mary Magdalene, when I picture her very pretty woman, but not happy. I don't picture her a happy looking person. And we don't know whatever happened to Mary Magdalene after the Gospels. Paul, in his letters, he never writes one word about her, never says one thing. And she's not in any of Luke's stories in the Acts of the Apostles, the second book that Luke writes. So where did she go? Well, I found an answer to that question. Some people say someone put her in a boat along with Lazarus, put him in the same boat, and maybe one or both of his sisters, and then that someone just pushed the boat out into the Mediterranean, which I learned is a very difficult sea to sail. It's hard, but God was steering that boat, because somehow that boat landed in France, and with everybody on board survived. And at that point, Mary Magdalene decided to give her life to God. So she decided to live in a French cave, completely naked. I have no idea why. And she would only live on. She didn't want to have anything worldly. She wanted to be the way she was when she came into creation, naked. And she would only live on what she could forage around the cave. And that's probably why she was crying in all those paintings, right?
I mean, that sounds very fanciful.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
And you say you worked hard and you finally found this one writer.
Yes.
But you're taking it as true?
Oh, no, certainly not taking it as true. I think it's as accurate as most of the other stories we read about Mary Magdalene. Not accurate. And let's see how the other stories got started. Today, in postmodern scholarship, Mary Magdalene is getting a makeover. Today, many scholars say that Mary was a very, very important part of the Jesus story. In fact, she was the one person that Jesus was the closest to. So do you remember that show, Jesus Christ Superstar?
Yes, I do.
Mary is the co-star of that show. She's the one who sings Jesus to sleep. Try not to get worried, try not to, problems that upset you. Everything's gonna be all right, Jesus. You know, she had that close relationship, but she also sings, I don't know how to love him.
Right.
Now, Andrew Lloyd Webber, a Brit, he wrote that show, but do you remember who wrote the lyrics? It was Tim Rice. He's a very popular lyricist, and I think he has a very deep theological sense about him, because when we think about it, sometimes I think about Jesus, I don't know how to love him, the man versus
God.
the God. You know, I can feel so close to Jesus as my brother, but I'm also his servant, you know, and my brother used to love telling my sister and I that, you know, remember Jesus? He was a God too. Yeah. But Jesus really was fully man and fully divine, all God. But I don't know, do you think of Christ as a human as much as you think of him as God?
Yeah, I do.
I do.
I do.
Always.
Feminist scholars do. I think women do more than men. They have a different
It
relationship.
makes, and I think it makes him more approachable as you think about him as the human side of him. And then and for me, then when I think of the God side of him, puts me in even more awe that as God, he would become human and experience all the things that he experienced as a human being.
But when you are praying fervently, deeply, wouldn't you rather be praying to the God rather than the man?
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Prayer.
Yeah.
When you need something. Okay, take your man hat off and put on that God hat. I need serious help here. Well, feminist scholars are very aware of Jesus as a man. Also, but it's good to remember that feminist scholars are not all female. There are a lot of male feminist scholars who study that part of theology. What do women do in the Bible? What are women responsible for? And the same goes for womanist scholars. Are you familiar with that term, a womanist scholar? It's usually an African American woman who works with the role of kind of the theological sphere of liberation theology. How did women free their people from bondage, the way Moses freed his people from bondage? And the same thing for mujerista scholars who are Latin American, sometimes female, sometimes not. That was the seat of liberation theology. It wasn't a black movement. It started out as a Latino movement. Bishops and priests taught people that they could be free the way God freed the Israelites. God would free them from colonial and imperialistic domination. And they were, let's face it, they were colonized slaves. So in postmodern studies, scholars are combing the text, particularly the Gospels and other early writings for the real Mary Magdalene. And you can search it too, but if I were you, I would stay in the Gospels. Mary is mentioned at least 12 times in the Gospels. And when that doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you think about it, there are members of the original 12 disciples who aren't mentioned at all in the
Right.
Gospels. You know, nothing is told about them and what they've done. But it's interesting, of all the Gospels, I think Mark, the one that we're studying, he seems to be the most gender neutral when it comes to describing the disciples. He kind of puts them in an equal position, male and female, at least as equal as a first century male could be. This was a different world, right? Now in Matthew's gospel, Matthew sort of follows Mark, and Matthew depicts Mary as completely loyal and dedicated to Jesus. She shows up in all the right places at exactly the same time at the cross. She's right there at the cross. She's at the empty tomb, and she's in the garden after the resurrection. But Luke, this is the story. I don't think Luke liked Mary Magdalene. He kind of attacks her. Interesting, if you read the text, he actually takes Mary out of the resurrection story entirely. And Luke seems to challenge her sanity. He moves her away from Jesus because he thinks she's crazy. And he creates this whole false narrative. Luke is the one who says that she was a prostitute. But now she's not. but because now she's redeemed, but then he seems to be saying, but come on, you readers, do you think that's believable? Do you think a woman like that could ever really be redeemed? And then he kind of answers this question, not a chance, he kind of infers. And then in Luke's gospel, she sort of fades away, and Luke lets Peter take the spotlight. Luke was a Peter guy, without a doubt. But she really fades away by the time the 6th century comes along, with the help of Pope Gregory the Great. Do you remember him? He was a corker. Mary Magdalene completely disappears as an individual, all because of Gregory, because he fuses her with 2 other Marys. Mary of Bethany, who was Lazarus and Martha's sister, and that sinful foot-washing woman with the nard, who was in Luke's story. He fuses all 3 of those Marys, or those 3 women, together to form one Mary. And you know, in a way, many of us do too. We kind of see them. When we were talking about Mark's story of the foot-washing woman, it was a possibility that could have been Mary, Lazarus' sister, right? She was a little unusual. And was there a chance that it could have been Mary Magdalene? She would have been close to Jesus at the dinner. Yeah, all believable. And I think we've been taught that those 3 kind of blend together. And why were we taught that? Because the Pope said that was the truth. That was the authority. But in spite of the fact that Mary Magdalene was edited out of some stories, in spite of the fact that she was canceled, marginalized by false accusations, in spite of the fact that learning about Mary was just stopped completely for decades and decades, today Mary Magdalene is a saint. And she's an important saint in the Catholic Church. In fact, Mary Magdalene is the saint of female preachers.
Really?
Yeah,
The saint of
female preachers.
Well, except that Catholic Church doesn't
Which
have
just doesn't have
No.
female.
Well, they do have female preachers, they're just not ordained.
But-
But there are a lot of women in the Catholic Church
Oh, they preach
that
what-
never shut their mouths, and you probably know a lot of them. They preach the law, and they preach the rules, and they preach. My mother, God bless her, she was a preacher. Ma, why do we have to go to church? It's the law, it's a holy day of and you know, your mother probably preached to you, right?
Do they preach in the church, but don't do communion, I would imagine?
They cannot?
No.
Well, they can be a communion assistant, like we have.
Oh, yeah.
But, oh yeah, that
That's a
changed.
big change, yeah.
That changed because they were running out of men. They cannot be deacons like males can, but they work so hard at their churches, so hard. If you have Catholic friends who are devoted, you know, they like Betsy and you, who work so hard here at our altar, they take that very seriously, and the music ministry and teaching, because we're not getting as many nuns as we used to. So they supplement teaching. But Meredith Johnson, thank you for that question. And if you have any questions, be sure to send them our way, because we're gonna be reading about the people that you're curious about. So it's good we know as much as we can. So now I am going to move on down to a place in Mark 15, and that's where I stopped. I stopped at Village on the Isle last time we spoke with the disciples, but I think we had, but you weren't here last week.
Correct.
Correct, was your daughter, right? But I'm going to go down to Barabbas, because I think that's where we were.
I think so.
What a story that is. And I'll probably annoy the bejesus out of you when I tell you what the scholars say. So please, don't think this is me telling you. Okay, I'm gonna start today with verse 6. I think that's where
That's
I
where-
think that's where we
Yeah.
are. So we're in chapter 15, verse 6. And please chime in with any questions you might have. We're in Jerusalem and it's festival time. And there is a custom in Jerusalem at the festival time, and this is the festival of the Passover, for the governor to release a prisoner from prison. And the selection was usually decided by the people. Anyone the crowd wanted to be released, the government would release that person, no matter what the prisoner might have done. So listen to this, because this is crazy. I think it's crazy, and I'm sure you do too. Mark says, there was this man in prison. He was arrested with a whole group of rebels who had committed murder during an insurrection in Jerusalem. And this man's name was
Barabbas.
Barabbas. So the crowd came and they began to ask Pilate, and this is right out of Mark, do for them what was the custom. Release Barabbas. Now, please remember, Barabbas was a convicted murderer. He was a domestic terrorist, an insurrectionist. And this is the guy the crowd wants back on their streets. Doesn't that sound crazy to you?
It sounds very familiar.
My goodness gracious. Some
Sounds-
people say,
I didn't hear what Cindy said, but it sounds
I
like.
just said it sounds familiar.
Oh.
sounds familiar. Yes, some people say it sounds very familiar to us today. The crowds today, say some people, are demanding the release of convicted criminals right now. But why would anyone want a convicted murderer released into their communities? And notice, I said convicted murderer, not a suspected murderer. Why would anybody want that, right? Well, some people say it's all because of the P word, politics. All because of politics. They don't like the political objectives of the government who convicted and incarcerated the violator. So the solution to the political disagreements is to release the violator into the community that he violated. Now, some people think that's crazy. Don't you think that's crazy?
Yeah.
But it seems that's exactly what's happening in Jerusalem. Patsy?
Well, weren't there were people sent by what the priests said that were trying to get Jesus killed. Weren't they sending people in to tell them this, to say Barabbas?
Yes, and we're gonna
And
talk
so-
about that.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
that's definitely. The crowd, they're the ones who are standing there demanding the release of Barabbas. But that's not different today either. There are crowds standing outside detention facilities. Let them out. And there are crowds standing outside of government offices and private offices saying, lock him up, you know, or shooting people in the back or in the neck because of politics. So we haven't come so far from the old days in terms of loving each other better. So the crowd's demanding the release of Barabbas, and even Pilate thinks this is crazy because he asks the crowd, don't you want the king of the Judeans set free? Now when Mark writes that, he tells us that even Pilate knows that the only reason that Jesus is there in this very dangerous position is because the priests and the elders envy Jesus. They resented the people who followed Jesus, so they set him up to take a fall. But Pilate, he always knew that Jesus was innocent. In fact, Mark implies that the priests actually agitated for Barabbas's release. Mark says the priest, and it should say it in your Bible, stirred up the crowd.
Yep.
So that they will insist that Barabbas is released. So crazy, right? Let the murderer be released. But Pilate tries again. He says to the crowd, if I release Barabbas, then what do you want me to do with this man that you call King of the Jews? And this is where it gets spine-tingling. And then the crowd shouts back at Pilate, crucify him. And Pilate asks them, why? What evil has he done? But the crowd shout back, crucify him. So Pilate caves. He wants to satisfy the crowd, so he releases Barabbas. And then he has Jesus flogged before he's handed over to be crucified. But before we get to those horrible scenes, let's take a closer look at Barabbas, who is the center of this prisoner exchange. Barabbas, it's an Aramaic name. Now, do you know what it means?
No.
Son of the Father. Son of the Father. And guess who else is called Son of the Father in this story? Jesus. Jesus. So say some, particularly the scholars, they will say, should we assume that Barabbas is there in this story in Mark as a literary device used by Mark to show that he's a narrative double for Jesus, who Mark calls the Son of the Father, right? So what do you think? Do you think that's possible? Mark is thinking, let's put Barabbas in there as a substitute for Jesus. There are two narratives that explain Son of the Father. But can you believe that this scene in Mark, the prisoner exchange scene, the Barabbas for Jesus, can you believe that this never happened? Or do you think it happened in real life?
I think it happened.
You think it happened?
Yeah. I think it's part of the Roman.
You don't think that Mark wrote it?
I think
He
Mark
made it up.
wrote it, but I think he's.
I don't think it's.
Mark wrote it to make his story about Jesus more meaningful to his community.
Says who?
Well, it might be possible. Well, a lot of people say it actually, a lot. That's what I was taught. Not in Sunday school, in seminary. That's what they taught preachers, prospective preachers to teach their congregation. That it's very possible this never happened. And some of the reasons why it's so possible is because it only happens in Mark's story, not in the other Gospels. But here's the main reason it was pounded into us in divinity school. There is absolutely no evidence to show that the Romans ever released any prisoner at Passover, much less an insurrectionist who had plotted against them. The Romans are not crazy, right? Why would they do that? Release a terrorist so he can continue to commit terrorist attacks on them. The Romans are not idiots, right? And to make the point that this never happened, scholars say, just look at the timing. And this gets a little going into the weeds stuff because you have to know a lot about the Old Testament. Barabbas was going to be released because it was a custom at the festival. But if we look carefully, we see that the festival had already occurred when Mark introduces this pericope. The lamb, the Paschal lamb, had already been eaten the night before. But Mark sticks to his story. The Jews are to blame, and the other three Gospels follow Mark's lead. But you're still thinking that this is a real story. And you know, the Romans were pretty meticulous when it came to keeping, they were kind of like the Nazis, keeping records of everything that happened. Who happened here and where and when. Not one release of any prisoners at not one Passover celebration, ever. The only place we ever read about this is in Mark's Gospel. Sorry?
How can I ever watch the road again?
The road. Well, I think that we can watch it. We just don't have to watch it as a documentary. We watch it as.
No, we don't, but I mean, I would just like.
But that doesn't mean that Jesus didn't do all the things that are
sure.
depicted in that. You know, it just means that Pilate was not as big of an idiot as we think he was. You know, he would never, ever. I mean, he would have been relieved of his command, right?
What would be the purpose of having a story though, especially with all of the,
Think about this, the purpose, say the people who study this, theological dimensions of this story is that Mark is speaking to a community. The Romans are about to destroy the temple, if they haven't already, but the word is out. It's not going to last much longer. So this is a story of hope. Mark is teaching his community, gonna lose the temple, the place of worship. They're losing their lives. They're watching their children be crucified. They're watching their husbands and their sons be crucified for the love of Jesus. So Mark is trying to show that Jesus, he didn't stick up for himself. He let Barabbas. He was merciful and compassionate.
but wouldn't they know, the people that Mark is writing to, wouldn't they know that there'd never been a prisoner released? I mean,
I'm not sure. Now what year did Jesus die?
33.
33. And when was Mark written? Not for 30 to 40 years later. So, did they know that? And what did they believe? You know, can they believe anything the Romans tell them? It's hard. Look at our society today. I mean, my hometown, New York. You know, it's hard for me to believe how much that city has changed. I was absolutely amazed. 48% of the people that are now living in New York City don't go home and speak English. That's a big change. Yeah. It's a big,
Now
that's
we
a
have
big,
a Mondami in there too.
and three,
And 3 people that you
supporters.
supported.
Yeah, and do you
So-
know that those 3 supporters, and we're not supposed to get into this, they won by the least number of voters ever recorded. I was going to, I think I did jot it down somewhere, and I said, no, we're not gonna talk about that, we're gonna talk about all the good things that are happening in our world. But people didn't come out to vote for or against anything, because they're heart sick, their soul's sick. And that's where we come in, you know, that's where discipleship comes in, to share the love that we have of our Savior. Pass it on so that it can be passed on. Hope it gets drifted up north, but here, you know, everywhere. So,
Donna,
yes,
you're saying that maybe Mary Magdalene was misportrayed.
misportrayed, absolutely. Misportrayed, misquoted, misdiagnosed, everything. Theologically, spiritually, yeah.
So that the Bible was incorrect in that.
I don't think the Bible was, I think whoever wrote that information. I never think of the Bible, as incorrect. I think very, very interesting, and that's one of the things that's how we'll start our class next week. How do we think of the Bible? Do we think every word, I mean, I have friends, fundamentalist believers. Donna is not just every word, it's every quotation mark, every comma, every period, and I'm going, you know, I said, but June, there were no periods, there were no quotation marks, the Bible wasn't written with those. Well, it is now, and you know, that sort of thing. So what do you think about the Bible?
That's what we were
Well, listening to you
No.
for
this
the
is
past
terrible.
year or 2 or 3, I think now, thanks to you, that a lot of what's written there is not correct.
When you say not correct, you think, I don't think that's the case, that it's not correct. I think it's told in a way, whatever, let's take an event, and we're all eyewitnesses to the same event. We all see the same thing, and yet each one of us will have a slightly different. And that's if we see it at the same time, and we talk about it when the cops come in and take but if we talk about it 50 years from now, please God, we will, it's gonna be different. It's gonna be different. Does that mean the event didn't take place? Does that mean the event didn't happen in a good way or a bad way, it just means that each one of us have a different take on it. Is it lies? Is it intentional? Sometimes people do lie on the stand or to the cops, right? And sometimes people who wrote Bible stories, I think, told a different version for your own good, you know, so that you would believe better and make the place a better place to be. But does that mean it's not true? I'm not sure. As Pilate would say, what is truth, right? What is truth? Which was your question 2 weeks ago, and we're still asking it. Anything that gets you closer to God, so that you can just absorb all that love and all that light, so that you can go out and reflect. I think that's truth, you know, and how you get to there. But what do you think? What do you think the purpose of the Bible is? To give a historical account of what people did back in the day?
It's an account of
It's supposed to be the.
how we're supposed to live.
Yes, how we are supposed to live. And we know it's not like Abraham and Sarah in their tent, right? Because we have to take what we learn from them and make it work.
And I think the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's from God.
Absolutely, absolutely, we have to do that. Yeah, so I think that's truth, without a doubt. That we get a little bit tricky when we start thinking about, yeah, well, what happens if you don't obey the commandments? Then what happens? And that, some people think that's the purpose of the Bible, right? Salvation. We all want to be good. We all want to be good people, because we all know good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell. But the Bible, I think, the purpose of the Bible is to show us that there are no good people. There's just a good God who walks with us every step of the way, so we can get better. But we don't come out good and we don't end up good. We're in the process of becoming good. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, you don't think that we're good.
Oh, I think we're very good, created. I just think, and I always think of you when I say this, free will. What was he thinking, right? That was a big risk the Jews took by giving God the right to give us free will in Torah, right? Do we ever sometimes we get it right, but mostly we don't. Mostly we don't make the best decisions. That's why we keep going back to the Bible, I think. Back to those 10, the Decalogue.
But
Yeah.
then- Okay, but when Jesus came along and he preached that we should love one another, and it's first love one another, and the first is love me, and then love
One
each
another.
other. Things changed. We didn't
What
have
changed,
this-
Patsy? What do
the
you think
strict
changed?
law, the way things were. The Old Testament is more of very strict rules. And then Jesus came along and things got better because we have love and his forgiveness, and he died for us so that we are forgiven, so we don't have to suffer like that. I don't see.
Okay, there's a lot about what you said. Now we've been walking through this great commission, with my sermons, Jesus tells the disciples, you're going out into the world, you're gonna teach about me, you're my hope, to get the good news, to get the gospel to all the people. And I wanna make sure I get to the same place. He gives them very specific instructions, right? Do you think he said, all that stuff that you used to believe in the Old Testament, we have to remember, Jesus didn't stop being Jewish. He didn't stop obeying Torah. In fact, the word Christian isn't even used until you get well into Paul. Jesus never thought it was a new religion. He never thought things had changed. So I'm curious. I briefly stated how the disciples, the original 12, ended their lives. It wasn't with love.
They weren't supposed to. They were told there wasn't gonna be
Well, actually, you said we don't have to suffer anymore because Jesus
Not the
came.
way,
They suffered.
well, yes, they did, physically. But they knew they were going to a better life. See, maybe I look at this simplistically. To me, Jesus is a son of God. And he
Yes.
had the form of a human,
Yes,
but it doesn't make him human. He was placed in Mary, the seed, as she was the vessel.
yes,
And then he was born in, because at that time, he had to have, that was the only time period that would work. If you tried to bring him in now, think of it, it wouldn't work.
you know, I have heard people talk about that, and I don't know, I don't think it was such an easy time for Jesus then. And it certainly wasn't an easy time for Jesus' followers. And I'm not sure it's an easy time for Jesus' followers
No, I
in a
don't
lot
mean
of
that
ways.
it wasn't easy for them. I mean, it's just that, maybe I'm not getting something, because to me, my faith is always, well, I've had it easier. I've had faith since I was born.
Oh,
So I was brought into a Lutheran
since you were
church.
created, yes,
And so
very good.
I also almost died as a child. So I know he's there.
Yes, yes.
And to me, it's simple. He's God.
He is God. He is God. And what's so extraordinary about what you just shared with us is that God the Father sent the Son to us.
Well, it's all three in one. It's one.
Yeah, who left us the Spirit. That's what Jesus left for you from the time you can ever remember. What a gift. What a blessing. What a blessing. And that's the hope every time we open the Bible, that we have that experience. That's why we ask the Holy Spirit to come with us. The Holy Spirit that Jesus left for us to guide us to that hope. But Jesus is not on an easy path today, and I'm not sure, I just want to talk a little bit more where we were in verse 6. I'm so sorry. I do like, we talked about who crucified Jesus. Who's responsible for Jesus' death, in your opinion?
I'd say, well, I think we all are, because he died for all of our sins. I mean, the Jews yelled, "Crucify him." Pilate was the one who said, "Okay, take him away."
You were in that crowd.
But he died for all of us.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just them, he died for all of our sins.
That's why he was born in the first place.
Yeah.
He knew it from the beginning.
To me,
Yeah.
it's
He knew
very
what he had to
personal.
do.
He died for me, and for each one of us, for the sins that we were going to commit.
But how about the story that we read in chapter 15 of Mark? Who's responsible for Jesus' death there?
Or is it the Pharisees? I always get them mixed up. The priests or the
The
Pharisees?
priests, yeah, some of them were Pharisees.
Who incited the
I-
crowd.
Not all of
I
them.
get them mixed up.
Yeah, some of them were Sadducees.
Well, in what you're saying, that the story of Barabbas isn't accurate, then Pontius Pilate was responsible. The Romans were responsible.
Romans, yeah, who else?
Yeah.
Because didn't we talk about the fact that the Jews, the Jewish authorities, like the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court, the priests from the temple, the Jewish authorities, and the Jewish authorities, they weren't these easygoing, get along, you know, they could be stoning. Oh my goodness, if you made your husband a bad meal the week before, you could be stoned. Or if you took your
You're
hijab,
exaggerating, right?
sorry?
You're all exaggerating right there,
No,
Actually not.
really?
actually not. There are some very scary, punishments for people who didn't live up to their commitments,
Expectations.
what God commanded them to do. And you could be something as simple as, don't touch that mountain. Remember when they were all there? Touch that mountain, stoned, immediately gone. You know, and if you continued to talk trash about your friends and neighbors, open your mouth and liquid lead, boiling hot, would be poured down your throat. I mean, so these priests were not necessarily easygoing, but they
Well, had to
couldn't.
preserve themselves too in their positions.
Exactly. They couldn't crucify Jesus. It was not possible for them to do.
And
They,
how could there be that kind of evil?
all right, so where were we? Where did we just leave? Is anything in this chapter of Mark real? Did it really happen? And what did you learn from what we read so far? It's really a terrible story so far. Where's the justice in this story? We see that Jesus was railroaded, and if we believe what I was taught in seminary, he was just replaced by a fake person. Barabbas isn't even a real person. Mark just shoved him in there. And he was turned in by these irreverent priests, Jewish priests. And he has to answer to this weak, ambitious governor who's trying to curry favor with the crowd, with his superiors, like the emperor. It's a very sad story because we put in Hellenized Jewish king, who was a king in name only, Herod. He was a maniacal person, as was the bloodthirsty emperor of the Roman Empire. So why is this story, the Passion, so important to us? And how does this story that we're reading in Mark, and we'll continue to read in Matthew next, Luke, and then in John, why is it so important to us, and how does it impact your relationship with Jesus? Does it make you angry with God? Do you think God should have done this to his son?
God
He was brought here for
That's
that
what he was
purpose.
for.
But he, as 3 in 1, he did it to himself. I mean, if they're one, it didn't just happen to Jesus, it happened to God. I mean, the 3 in 1.
Yes, the incarnate
Yeah.
God.
He had a choice. Jesus was a human. He had a choice not to go that route.
Yeah. And do you think God, yes, we're gonna leave in 1 minute. Do you think God, and then we'll stop here, do you think God had a choice? Remember in the garden when Jesus says, please take this cup from me. Do you think God said, give me a minute to think about it? No, you're God. It wasn't a choice, right? Did you get the idea it was a choice? It was foretold,
Yes.
right? This is how it was
the
always,
plan from the beginning.
always,
Yeah.
from the creation. Yeah, once again, God is saving his people, and he's saving it with himself, his son. And so let's
This is
try to get through the rest of this chapter. It's a very difficult chapter. And think about the Bible you're reading, because that's what we're going to talk about next week. What Bibles are we reading, and can we trust one other than the other? And God bless. Send me your opinions too. We love you and we miss you. Bye.
Bye.